All right, people, I made my way out here to Bistano again this morning. It is May, yet we had a pretty good storm yesterday. Dropped about 2 inches of rain, cooled the water off significantly. I caught quite a few fish. The water temperature had gone all the way up to 82. We had a rainstorm that had dropped it down to about 76. Then we've had another with this front that's passed through with that 2 inches of cold rain. And looking at the water temp, it's like 72 degrees. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. That plus now there's a north wind, which is again a bit strange for May for us, but the weather still seems like it's about a month off. And then this weekend it's going to get almost to 100 degrees, so the water temperature is going to shoot right back up. It's been an odd year for weather, but so again, I'm not sure how well I'm going to do, but there's a couple things I wanted to talk to you about anyway, and it's something that's helped me, and that's sort of the principle of keeping things simple and going back to really the fundamentals of fishing. So I've got several rods up here. There are 4 rods up here. There's a couple of spinning reels, but that's in case I see a crappie. But the bass rods, right? I've got 4 of them up here. But I have to tell you that that's not necessary. And in fact, most of the time when I'm here, I'll use 2 of them at max. And the reason is because I sort of forced myself to do that for a number of reasons. For most of the time, for most of my life anyway, I had to force myself to use 1 rod. And the reason was because I just didn't have the money to spend on the equipment, right? And so because of that, 1 rod was what I had, and so I had to pick the best of what I could do with that rod and sort of adapt it for everything. And I think it actually served me well to do that. Made me appreciate what I had, and it still does, but also I think it made me a better fisherman to a certain extent, at least because of me being confined to a certain way of fishing. I got to the point where I'd figured out what it was that I wanted to do as a fisherman. And I think that's something that you have to do. Everybody wants to be able to do the best of everything, and I don't think that you can do that. There's not enough time whenever you go to work and you're dealing with family and everything else, and you want to go to family events, and what are you going to do? You can't skip out on everything to go fishing so that you can be the best of everything. That's not going to happen. So I would suggest to you that you pick a thing that you like a lot and do that. And the thing that stuck out to me always was soft plastics. I just liked it. I liked, pulling that worm along the bottom and then feeling that thump and watching the line move, and then having me being in control of when to set the hook and all that. It's not that I don't like crankbait fishing or anything like that. It's just that always stuck out to me and I liked it. And so what I ended up doing was getting a rod that would do that well. And I've pretty much stayed in that vein, even though I can afford more than 1 rod now. But so I want to make a suggestion, that you find a rod that will do the thing that you want to do well, and stick with that. Okay, this is a Shimano. I've always been partial to Shimano, and this is a expensive rod, at least for me. It's a GS Loomis E6X, and it's their lower end rod, but I have to tell you, it feels great, and I like it a lot. I'd grown up using ugly sticks and whatever in the world I could find, but those heavier rods are difficult to fish all day and to do it efficiently and to do it well. I always wondered why when I'd watch someone on TV or see what they did, and I'd watch them throw the bait and it would go right where they wanted it to go exactly every time. And I got really good at casting like that, but usually in with one method, right? I couldn't do it flipping it backwards or with my other hand or something like that. It just wasn't going to happen. But I found out that whenever you have the right equipment, it makes a big difference. And so invest in 1 rod that's a really nice rod. And the second thing is sticking to one thing for a while. I wasn't very good at flipping trees when I moved here into this area about 11 years ago from South Louisiana. There were virtually no trees where I was at. I fished the marsh, I fished offshore, I fished Toledo Bend occasionally, several other lakes in that area and rivers, but I didn't have to flip anything. I could just throw the line, and that's a completely different thing. And the reel has to be set up differently. You have to have a different quality reel, different quality rod, and all that. And I never got good at doing that. But then here, when I get here, most of the fish, there's hardly any grass in this lake to speak of. And if you look around, if you can see this, the branches are quite close to the water. And you can't make a normal cast and get that bait to hit right at the base of the tree. And a lot of times, especially during the summer, that's exactly what you have to do. It's not that they won't come out for it, they do occasionally, but there are a lot more fish that will simply just not move. And I think especially in weather like we're experiencing today, where we had a sudden drop in the water temperature. It's dropped 10 degrees in about 4 or 5 days. There's a north wind. They're probably going to, and it's really sunny, right? So they're probably going to be hanging out in the shade, right underneath the tree, sitting right there, and they're going to be opportunistic feeders, right? They're not going to go out and chase everything anywhere that they see it. They're not going to move 20 feet to hit a bait. They're going to sit right there, and you're going to have to put it right on top of them. And so the way to do that is to be able to throw it underhanded, right? To flip it or pitch it up there, and to try to do it without, splashing the water in such a way that you scare off everything around. You want it to hit, sort of gently. I don't always do that, but in general I do. But the way that I was able to do that was to bring one rod, right? And I had a backup, all right, but I had one rod, and I only brought this with me, with one rod. And the reason I did that, and by the way, this is just some flipping baits, and this is a little box of flipping hooks, some tungsten weights, and these little, they're really like bobber stoppers, but they stop the weight from sliding up the line, and that's extremely important in these trees as well. I'll probably do another video on just setting up for that and how to do it, because it's very frustrating if you're not set up right. You're going to stay hung up in the trees. Things are not going to go well, but I don't have time to deal with that today, just this one thing. But I would bring with me just my flipping bait setup with my baits that I was going to use, and I'd already decided what color. I already knew that, and I was done. This is what I would bring with really one rod, and I had, again, one rod just for a backup that would sit out in the rod box. And the reason I did that was because after about 15 or 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour or whatever of fishing like that, I would get frustrated and tired of it, especially if I wasn't catching a fish. And because I wasn't catching a fish, I would abandon that setup and go back to something that I was more familiar with. And I think that we do that in life with all sorts of things, right? We're not sure what's going to happen. We don't want to waste our time, and so we go back to the thing that we know, where, well, at least I know this, right? But that's not always the best way to go. Sometimes it takes, the effort and the work that you have to put into it to get what you want out of it. And I have to tell you, it took me maybe 3 or 4 outings, and I felt extremely confident in throwing a bait in that way, because I had thrown that way thousands of times. Because it doesn't take long, especially in a lake like this. Maybe you don't have trees, maybe you've got bushes, or you've got some sort of other grass or something that you're wanting to pitch to. And if you just spend your time doing just that, that's it. Committed myself to do that, and this whole trip, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pitch the bait out, pitch the bait out, pitch the bait out. And what's going to happen is that you're going to become a better caster. You're going to be able to get it exactly where you want it to be, which is going to help you catch more fish. Number 2, you're going to get better at presenting that bait and working that bait and figuring out all the little nuances of what makes a fish hit the bait. Again, that's going to make you catch more fish, right? And so You're going to know what distance you need to be from that object, about where to position the boat. All of these other things come into play, and before you know it, it's just instinctual. You're going to be able to move through trees or bushes or grass or whatever it is and pitch that bait exactly to where you want it to go, and you're going to be able to just see it in your mind's eye, essentially, and know exactly what to do. You're going to become a better fisherman because of it, and you're going to catch more fish, and it's going to be more enjoyable. And so I would suggest you do that, right? If every time that you go fishing, you're moving around with 5 or 6 different rods, they have different actions, different reels, different types of baits, they cast differently. You're going to get, especially if you're struggling to catch fish, it's going to be more, I think you're going to get more frustrated with that. So just commit yourself to that. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do exactly what I did, right? Maybe where you are, or you think crankbait fishing is the best, right? Well, that's fine. Get yourself a crankbait set up and figure out what it is that you want to use, and bring just those baits, and commit yourself to doing that, and do that for several trips and watch what happens. You're going to see your catch numbers rise. So, and by the way, I've done this with other baits too since then, because it was so effective for me. I've come out with like little crankbaits and rogues and jerk baits, and I've committed myself to just do that and that alone, and came out and only fish that way. And as you can see in this lake, this is a kind of a difficult lake to do that with, especially to place that bait where I wanted it. But it worked, you know, because usually when I picked it up and I threw it, when I was in the middle of flipping, what would happen is I'd end up in a branch or some moss or something, or hung up on the tree. You know, there were all sorts of other things. So I would throw 2 or 3 times, put it down, disgusted at it. But now, you know, I'm able to throw that thing. I can pick up either one and do that because I became proficient in that. So I would suggest that you do that, and you can run through a variety of baits and do that. There are only really 4, in my mind anyway, 4 types of baits, right? We have soft plastic, and again, that can range from weighted to not weighted to top water or whatever. You've got spinner baits, top water baits, and crankbaits. Those 4 categories. And that's generally why I pretty much have 4 rods that I would take with me, because if I'm going to go, especially to a new lake where I'm not sure what to expect, I'd have 4 baits on 4 rods. And these are the combinations of baits that I think would probably work for that lake in those conditions. And everything would sort of branch off of that. Now, I may need to tweak it a little bit when I get there, but those are the things that are the possibilities. And then once you figure out how to catch the fish, you're probably only going to use that 1 rod, you know, or maybe a second one sometimes, whenever you're fishing. So I would suggest that to you. Get familiar with what you're using. Even if you fished your whole life, as I have, I was more effective at doing that whenever I decided to commit myself to it, and to not change what I'm doing every 15 or 20 minutes. You just simply may not be in an area where there are fish, right? Because you have no idea if they're there, especially if you don't have the electronics to look for them. And even if you do, those fish, for whatever reason, might be setting up in that area, not to feed, but for some other reason, de-stressing or something, and they're not going to eat. I don't know, but you know, you have to decide that I'm going to fish with this thing, and I'm going to catch fish with this, and then you move forward and do that, and build up your confidence in all of your arsenal, so that when you go fishing, you know what you can do, and you know you're going to catch some fish. So I hope that was helpful to you guys. Now let's go see if we can catch some bass. Not sure again with the weather what to expect, but we're here for it. All right. Also catching a few bluegill for someone for bait, guys. Catching a few anyway. It's been rough though. There are a bunch of fry garters up here, and they're grabbing the bait in the back end of it and just sort of hauling it off and dropping it. So it's been difficult to hook most of the fish that I've seen, and almost all the ones that I've caught have not been Florida bass. They've been northern bass or spotted bass. And those tend to not care what the weather does. If the weather does anything, they get excited. But Florida bass, they don't. They get lethargic unless they like this constant heat to be every day. That's what they want, just like it is in southern Florida. And so what ends up happening is you go and you catch a lot of smaller fish. After a front like this, it becomes more difficult. You can get those others to bite, but I don't have time to deal with all that today. You have to sit and concentrate and fish very slowly. Also, the wind has been whipping. It's not at this second, but it's difficult to do that when the wind is blowing so hard too. In this lake, I think the last I saw was something like 40% of the fish in this lake were Florida bass, or at least hybrids. I think it may even be higher than that. So a lot of them here, if you got a cool front that comes through, they just sort of turn off, completely turn off. All right, guys, I got to call it. I got sidetracked earlier catching brim, didn't realize the time, but I need to be somewhere in just a little bit here. So I'm gonna call it for the day. Like I said, caught a few, but most of them were small. I could see some of the big fish that just wouldn't move. I dropped it down in their face, didn't care about it. But I'm gonna do a video in the future also about how to fish on a budget, and you know what to do, the kind of rod and reel to go ahead and get, to try to get that's on a budget, but allow you to still catch fish, and to do that consistently. So that video is upcoming, but until then, I'm going to see you guys next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe, please. See you later.